And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. As always, today I am super excited to have James Blatch on the show with me today. James is a writer of military thrillers and also one of the biggest voices in the indie publishing community. And so we wanted to have James on today to not only talk about his path and his journey to publishing and the types of books that he writes and what motivates and inspires him, but we also want to talk about indie publishing and why this is such a crucial uh, thing to have in the market nowadays, and why I believe that indie publishing is really um, uh, the great equalizer, and that it puts the power back in the writers, with the writers. And for so long, the power dynamic has been so lopsided, if you will. And indie publishing over the last decade and a half or so, in kind of it's from its really PowerPoint of the Kindle revolution to now has really changed all of that. And so, anyway, to say all that, welcome to the show, James.
Thank you very much, Hank. That was a good introduction.
Well, thank you. Um, we were supposed to do this a couple of days ago, and we had some time zone snafus, and so I
Entirely my fault.
apologize. Well, it's okay. It's all right. But if anyone showed up the other day for that, our apologies. It's just a thing that happens. But James, I love to start the show with a fun question to kind of set the tone. And one question that I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I think I can pinpoint it. So I started reading. I have a boy. I have a girl and a boy now, and I understand that classic thing that girls read, boys tend not to.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that a friend of mine had a copy of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Mm.
I was probably age 13, and it was on his bedroom floor. And I looked at it and said, "Oh, what's that?" And it had just been published, and he said, "Oh, it's weird. It's a weird thing. My dad gave it to me." So I said, "Well, can I have it?" And I absolutely loved it. So I got into reading thanks to that. Thank goodness. You find that one book. Still trying to find it for my son, William, that one book that will spark him. But so I was reading novels, had an interest in military aviation. My father's an RAF pilot. And I read a couple of books by Stephen Koontz. Everyone knows Dean Koontz, but Stephen
Right.
Koontz was the author of Flight of the Intruder, which is actually a pretty good film as well as a book. Fantastic book. And I read his third book in a row, and I just started writing my own novel. It was probably a complete rip-off of what I just read from him, but it was just me writing, and I wrote pages and pages and pages. Showed it to my dad. I was probably, I'm going to say 18 or 19 then. Showed it
Yeah.
to my dad, who was typical. He's very much that kind of silent generation. Said, "What? Yes. What?" I said, "Well, any encouragement?" Didn't really get any encouragement. I know, not his fault, but
Yeah.
just that thought. Well, how does writing work? How does publishing work? And you start to look into it. I started to feel it wasn't me. I was not the sort of person who got a publishing deal from anybody, and so it kind of fell by the wayside. I became a television news journalist, which I suppose satiated my desire to write, because you wrote
Yeah.
small stories every day, even though they were like 90 seconds.
Yeah.
It was doing that. But I did notice a couple of times when I was working as a reporter in the newsroom, occasionally the editor would say, "We've been asked to do," like if you covered a big national story, you'd been asked to do a newspaper piece about it. And I really enjoyed that longer form, and I sort of started to realise I wanted to write something that was more than just 2 minutes and gone and you're on the next story. But again, it sat there. I was in my 40s when a friend of mine became a self-published author, started selling books, and he encouraged me. He said, "Oh yeah, sorry, that's right." So he was writing. I don't know whether that inspired me or not at the time. We were working together definitely at the time. But on the 1st of November 2010, I
Yeah.
opened up what was then called Twitter. So 2010, so I was born in 67, so in my 40s.
Okay.
Opened up Twitter, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm going to be doing this." And it had a link to NaNoWriMo. which I had never heard of, didn't know what it was.
Yeah,
Write a novel in
yeah,
a month. And I opened a Word document, and I thought, I'm going to do this. I opened a Word document, and this story fell out of a unique story. Nothing, no, it was sort of military aviation. It wasn't Stephen Coote, it was my own story. It was sort of about my dad, and it just fell out of me. And that was my first book. And I don't really know how I came up with the story. I must have been ruminating it. So a bit of a tortuous kind of, stop and start, which I think is not
yeah.
that unusual. And then in my 40s, the advent of independent publishing just made me feel empowered that I could
Right,
write and have a book.
right, right. I want to stick a pin in that NaNoWriMo story for just a second, and I want to ask you one question that I think will probably lead back to that. But over the last decade and a half of doing author interviews, I've talked to a number of people that started in journalism that then go on to write fiction, which is kind of a funny thing because in journalism, we're taught to um, tell the story. Don't bring any of your personal baggage, your personal whatever. It's the story, and that's it, just the facts. Um, but then a good number of writers that I've gotten to know over the years transitioned from uh, reporting journalism to writing fiction, and I'm always curious, what tools did you pick up from journalism that you keep in your writer toolbox that you depend on, or that maybe journalism helped you to see the shape of stories differently? I don't know what it is because I didn't start as a journalist, but I just wonder, did being a journalist uniquely qualify you to be a novelist later on?
I think for me, funnily enough, there were both some hindrance actually from having been
Really?
a television news journalist and some help. The help is that when you become a journalist, you're very focused. When you're a kid, sort of growing up in the newsroom, you're very focused on the facts of the matter and not making a mistake and being
Yeah.
fair and balanced and all that stuff. Although I notice in America, you don't sort of do the balance thing like we do in the UK, where you had to be really scrupulously balanced.
No, we
Might be
don't do
easier
balance
that
very
no,
well.
just one channel does that and the other channel does the other thing. But so that's your focus. But then good editors, and not all the editors you work for are good, but good editors say to you, you need to tell a story. So you're going off to do a missing child or an industrial dispute or whatever it is. And what they want when you came back with your 90-second to 2-minute television was a 2 minutes that had a beginning, a middle, and end, and had an arc and a loop, and perhaps came back to where it started with. Although we weren't allowed to use remains to be seen at the end, because it's the easy that you can put that at the end of every news report you ever do. So that was banned in my newsroom. So they're always talking about telling stories, and
Yeah.
in all honesty, I don't think I was that good at that aspect of it. I'm not really sure I processed it or realised what they meant by that. But when I started writing the longer form stuff, and particularly my novel, in fact, I think starting the novel in NaNoWriMo really showed me I had no clue what a story was. I'd read novels my whole life and never really properly taken account of how they worked. I'd
Right.
never read a self-help book on the craft of novel writing. And the other thing that worked against me, another hindrance, was that I was so used to distilling stuff down to very, very short bites. That's the opposite skill needed to tell a long form story where you let things breathe and
True.
ruminate and you have foreshadowing and stuff like that. So I've had to learn all that stuff. The only helpful bit, I suppose, is literally the writing. I would have written a lot of words in my BBC career, which is, and if you're starting, most people, if they've worked as a, I don't know, garage mechanic or whatever their job is, and then they become a novelist, they probably haven't had that background to it. But
True.
and I suppose the other thing, Hank, is research.
Yeah.
I can. It's a lot easier than it was in my early days without Google, but I'm pretty good at researching. I can go to a library and research the National Archive in the UK and know what I'm doing to find influence.
Interesting. I've asked that question to probably 100 journalists who became novelists, and everyone has a different answer.
Yeah.
Like there's not one universal. Oh, this is what helped me as a novelist. Everyone has a different perspective. So I love it. Jump back to that NaNoWriMo experience. Did you complete the NaNoWriMo challenge of writing 50,000 words in a month?
Do you know, I did, but I only did. I'm sure I only did it for a reason, one reason. So I started it. So I'd left the BBC at this point. I was working as a film examiner, where you watch films all day. It was a great fun job. Not really going anywhere though. And I
Did they
started.
provide popcorn, or did you have to bring
They
your
did
own?
not. Everyone asked that question. Do they provide pop? Because we did have a cinema. We had a theatre in the basement, and twice a week you'd probably be in theatre in a dark room watching. It could be anything from Marvel or some French art house. You didn't really know what it was, but it was a heck of a job. I enjoyed it. But so I was doing this, and it's 1,600 words a day. And I remember I even bought a little tiny laptop that I could use on the train. So I was really determined. But it's really hard, especially if you've never done it before. And I got to kind of day 4, day 5 and started really wobbling. And I was fairly certain there's no way I'm going to keep this up. But I got a phone call from an old friend at the BBC who saw that I posted on Twitter that I was doing it. And she said, we'd like to do a piece about this on Radio 4 next week. And Radio 4 is like a big national channel in the UK. It's our main news channel. And she said, do you want to come in and talk about it? And I said, yeah, sure. She said, well, it's on Thursday. So I kind of had to carry on because I was going to appeal. And then it turned out to be what she meant by Thursday was a week Thursday. So I had to carry on. And I think that's sort of 10, 15 days is the really difficult hump. And if you get over it, you're going to finish. And so thankfully, because I couldn't feel, in all honesty, I could turn up to the BBC and pretend I was still writing this novel. I had to actually still be writing it. That got me over the hump. So I got my 50,000 words done. And the novel wasn't finished. I carried on writing it. It became a bit unwieldy, sort of 90,000 words. And then people who've listened to the podcast I used to do, the self-publishing show, will know there was a very torturous few years then of me trying to work out how to turn that into a proper novel. And it wasn't until I spoke to a book coach, Jenny Nash, that everything started to click for me, and I had some sort of professional help, and that led to the publication.
So when did... I believe you said a minute ago that there was a friend of yours who really kind of shined some light on the indie publishing aspect of it. When did you start realizing that this was a viable thing, and that this was more than just, because before the Kindle revolution, there was vanity publishing, which there's still vanity publishing. I don't know how, but there still is, and people still get taken advantage of. But before all of that, it was it was really dark alley kind of, creepy vibe about it. That if you told someone that you used one of these vanity presses, it just automatically put up a funk on the whole thing. But when the Kindle came along, and then KDP, Amazon, it had the foresight to know that if we're going to make this Kindle product successful, we've got to have a way to generate content for it. And I'm sure there were a lot of business decisions with contracts with publishers and all that. And, we need to have plenty on here that we have some control over. So I'm sure there was a lot of that. But when did that start kind of taking shape for you, and you started realizing that, okay, this is actually a viable thing, and it doesn't have the stigma that other things have had? This is actually a legitimate way to connect with readers, and to not only distribute the book that I wrote, but really to form a relationship with consumers in an interesting way. Like indie publishing is more than publishing a book. It gives you the ability to be in contact with the people that consume the thing that you uniquely do. It really it's a unique relationship that is allowed because of this thing. When did all of that start to become a reality for you?
I sort of went the wrong way around in this, because although I'd started the book in 2010 and got to this 90,000, I then shelved it, put it in the drawer. I never did. I can't remember back then, because I was only vaguely aware of indie. I had a friend who was doing it, but like you say, you weren't really sure, is that just vanity publishing or was there something else going on?
Right.
And And I don't know what I thought about traditional publishing, but I've never been particularly taken with the idea of sending out begging letters for somebody to publish your book. And I always felt that was a sort of unempowering experience for a writer.
Sure.
So I don't know if I thought this would ever see the light of day. I was just doing it as a project for myself, or I'd just get it printed up maybe with a vanity press at some point. But then what happened is I left the BBFC, the Film Examiners, started a video production company, and my friend who was publishing started to do online courses, wanted to do online courses to teach people how to self-publish. And he asked me if I would go into business with him doing that. So I actually went into business, set up the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure of these online courses for indie publishers, learnt huge amounts about it, started doing the podcast, and then realised I should blow the dust off this book. Rather than me being the kind of the technical side hand here, I can be an author. And that's when that clicked, and then I became incredibly excited. Right from the beginning, excited about being an indie writer. I've never been through that phase of wanting to be a traditionally published writer, and I still haven't got there. Maybe at some point when I'm 94 years old and about to croak, I'll finally hand my books over to a publisher who can carry on with them. But I love being in control of them. So that empowerment you talk about, that new way of operating where you're close to your readership, all of those things were immediately attractive to me. And for the first time, I felt excited about my book being published because I was doing it. So yeah, that's when that happened. And I guess that was that was a few years later. That was probably 2015, 16, well, maybe even 16, 17. And then I realised my book was in a complete mess. I didn't know what I was doing. So that's the point at which I started revising it. So it actually took 10 years to publish, 2010 to 2020, but really it took probably 4 years because I wrote it in a month or two and then left it for 5 years and then picked it up and then spent a rather torturous 3 or 4 years rewriting it and getting it right.
Yeah. A lot of people think that indie publishing means that you are going to spend all of your time selling your book, and that there won't be a lot of time left for writing books. And one thing I've learned from interviewing authors all across the spectrum of indie publishers to traditional publishers is that the state of traditional publishing now is at the point where even traditionally published authors have to be out there selling their book. The amount of interfacing with the public, the amount of building newsletter lists, all of that is almost exactly the same for traditionally published authors and indie authors. You still have to be out there shaking the bushes, selling that book. So there's not a lot of difference there. And the old idea of sitting in the ivory tower, writing a book, tossing it out the window, and someone else handles all of that for you is really a misnomer these days. That publishing has changed a lot, and we don't really know that if it was ever really that way. That's just the idea we have. Did you start kind of realizing that about publishing? And, when did you kind of see that if you're going to be successful in publishing, you've got to do the work no matter who's publishing the book?
Yeah, so I grew up surrounded by this. Grew up as a writer surrounded by this, so it was built into me right from the beginning. I didn't know the other route, or think I wanted to be a part of it. So, I'm a slightly control freaky, I suppose, about the stuff I do. So it suited me that I would be in control of all those things. But I think you're right. You started off that question talking about the time commitment, and I think a lot about this, and I think we have to be honest with ourselves. You have to tell prospective indie authors that there is a time commitment. And Tony Lee, I've just been to the Ireland's Publishing Conference. It's a brand new sort of indie focused publishing conference in Ireland. Absolutely fantastic conference, by the way. People should look out for it for next year. But Tony Lee, a very successful writer, he said, don't think of yourself as a writer who publishes. Think of yourself as a publisher who writes. Because I would say it's about half the day. That's the most it's going to be. It doesn't need to be more than half the day, which still leaves the other half of the day if you're going to be full time for writing. Right. But if you've got 10, 15 books out, which is a lot of indie authors get to that point because that's kind of how the commercial side of it works. you do have a bit of an infrastructure to manage and new things to learn, and you need to be open-eyed about that. It doesn't have to be a terrible experience. I love it. I really enjoy the marketing side of it. I know people who were terrified of it all at the beginning, and once they started learning it, have become very adept at it and enjoy it. So, I suppose if you've grown up thinking HarperCollins are going to publish my book and I will be in that ivory tower you describe, or this might feel like a second option. For me, it's number one option. The amount of possibilities. So first of all, the commercial side, if you get it right, the financial side is way better. You keep a big chunk of the change from every time somebody buys a book. And secondly, nobody's hassling you for a deadline. You don't want to write a book that year, don't write a book that year. If you want to write 5 books that year, that's entirely a matter for you. And thirdly, all the other aspects of control, the price, where it goes, is it going to KU, does it not, what cover, you want to change the covers, let's change the covers, you want a new blurb, let's do the blurbs. You can get all the professional help you need, just piecemeal it. Freelancers, our industry's filling up now, isn't it, with freelancers with a lot of experience from HarperCollins and all those other publishers who are now offering their services to us. So I think it's a great option and not one to be afraid of. You shouldn't be afraid of it.
Yeah. You talked a minute ago about that the business side could take up half the day, but if you're doing it full time, that leaves the other half. Most people don't have the luxury of starting full time. So if someone is starting out, what is the most important thing that they should focus on? Should it be, should they prioritize their writing? Should they prioritize platform building? Marketing, like if someone feels like they have a great book, let's start with having written a book, because if you haven't written a book, obviously you need to start by writing a book. You need to be writing, I would assume. What do you, where do you, if someone is wanting to build their writing business but not there yet where they can do it full time, where do you recommend that they start prioritizing?
It's a great question, and if you want to send out to your list, I actually did a PDF basically answering this question, the 5 immediate actions for a new self-publishing author. I'm happy to give it to you, and you can send it out to people.
That'd be wonderful.
So I think I've boiled it down to 2. One is understand your book as a product, which means understand the role the cover has, not just it should have a good cover, whatever that means, but what role the cover plays in people making a purchasing decision. Understand that it really signals the genre, and you've got to get that right. Understand the role of the blurb and all the other things. That will help you start to see the book that you've written, not as a book you've written, your baby, but as a product that you need to package and sell. And that takes a little bit of learning. The traditional industry does have 100 years of experience of this. We don't, so we need to learn this stuff. And secondly, the only other thing to do you can't really do this too early, is to start a mailing list. Mailing lists are so important to independent authors. They're going to be your tribe. You're going to get your best reader friends from there. You're going to get advanced readers. And when the time comes in the future, they're going to help you launch your books. And if Jeff Bezos decides to close Amazon tomorrow, you've got a list of readers who are your fans who you can use as a starter elsewhere. But if you haven't got a mailing list, you're stymied if things change, because a lot of everyone who buys your book on Amazon is your reader, but they're not your customer. They're Amazon's customer, and Amazon are never going to give you their email address. And so I'd say understand the commercialization of your book and start a mailing list.
Love it. In talking with writers over the years, there seems to be 2 camps that writers, at least newly published writers, kind of fall in. Some people will write a book, and we're just going to use the traditional publishing paradigm for a second, because I think this kind of helps to set up the question. And they'll write a book and they'll send it out on submission, and no one bites. It doesn't sell, so they scrap that book and they write another one, and then they send it on submission and it doesn't sell, so they go write another one, and then you wind up with like Brandon Sanderson, who had written 13 books before being published in his first one. Other people will write a book and it doesn't sell. They'll go back and revise that same book. It doesn't sell again. they go back and revise again and again and again until that book is polished to the point that it reaches publishing perfection, or at least gets to the point where either the market has changed or the book has changed enough. In If we take that same kind of conundrum and move it to the indie publishing paradigm, where some folks think that if I publish a book and it doesn't really reach the audience, it doesn't sell well, I can go back and revise it, or I can redo the marketing, or change covers or whatever, or some other people will scrap that and move on to the next project. Do you have any advice for people that find themselves where one product is not moving well, it's not connecting with readers for whatever reason? In your experience, is that a marketing problem, or is that a writing craft problem, or are those universal terms we can talk about? I mean, is it individualistic to a point?
I mean, I think there are readers out there for everyone.
Yeah,
The key thing is to understand what you're writing. It sort of goes back to what I was just saying about understanding the product. I mean, Susie K. Quinn, she was in Ireland. She
yeah,
talks about this, that if you think about the traditional model before, you had people in a big building in New York or London who thought a lot about what genres were working, what readers wanted, because they're commercial, they're looking for products. They don't need to write the books because there's a million people writing them begging letters every day saying, can I please publish my book? Please publish my book. So they'll say, right, this is what we want. This is going really well. Romantasy is the big thing at the moment. We need to have 5 romantasy titles next year. Go through the list of submissions and find me 5 romantasy titles. Now, before romantasy was a big thing, you would have been lucky if you'd written a romantasy book and submitted it. So that was just kind of a random meeting.
right.
But for the vast majority of people, they're pouring their life in their house. They're writing this book with no clue what people are going to want in a year's time when the book's finished. No idea. So we do need to reverse engineer that. We need to be both publisher and writer. So we need to start thinking, look at the market. You can use tools like Alex Newton's K-Lytics. Dave Chesson has tools as well. You can look at these tools and you can see where's the appetite for a particular genre. Where's the low demand? So those readers are being underserved, and you'll get these traffic light systems that will show you. And then you need to look at that kind of Venn diagram of what you're interested in, what you would like to write. And when you find that, that's a much better start than simply saying, well, I want to write a novel. Most people who say, most of my friends who say I want to write a novel, in their mind is a kind of Ian McEwan, Ian Banks literary fiction novel.
Yeah.
I've got this great saga story about a family that goes back in time. They don't think I'm going to write Jack Reacher or James Bond. But guess what? Most people read Jack Reacher and James Bond. They don't read those big literary. I mean, they're brilliant books. Ian McEwan is my favourite novelist in the world. But if you want to write commercial fiction and make money, do a bit of like the car industry would do, market research. Don't build a product in the dark and hope it's going to sell. Build a product based on need and want. So I think that's one thing to avoid being in that position at the end of your writing process. So you've got a book that no one wants to write. Wants to read. And I do, so most of my publishing experience actually comes from the fact that I started an indie publishing company to sort of help publish authors who just didn't want to do the marketing. And I always said to them, you should self-publish first, but if they didn't want to, we took on their books. And in some cases, the author had passed away. So actually how the company started. So that's how that started. And I've been through a lot of submissions. And one thing my heart sinks a little bit is when you say to somebody, what genre and subgenre is your book? And they hesitate and they say, well, interesting, it doesn't really fit into a genre. And that's the point at which I think, okay, I'm not going to criticize you for writing this book.
Yeah.
That's half romance, half thriller, half sci-fi, but be aware that people make conservative choices about what they read. They know it's like standing outside a cinema. If you see Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz running with guns in their hands, it's like an old pair of slippers. You're going to walk in and watch that film every day of the week. If you see an image of a wagon wheel and you're not really sure what it is, and you don't recognise the stars or the directors, very little chance you're going to take a chance on seeing that film. That's how books are bought. People buy things they recognise, which is why us thriller writers put the same type of image on all our covers to signal to somebody, if you like Jack Reacher, you're going to like this book. So I think there's a lot you can do to mitigate being in that position where your book simply isn't selling. And it is my experience, it's mostly genre expectation. It's either the author in their marketing doesn't understand the genre of the book they've written, so they're not finding the audience, or they're same sort of thing really, but they're selling their romance book or their cozy mystery book, but the book itself has a lot of tropes that don't really match that genre. So it's normally a mismatch of expectation. It's not because it's a bad book, whatever that means. It's not because of that. Because I know books that have been full of typos and not grammatically well written have flown off the shelf because they're a solid story in the middle of a genre.
Right.
And they get, T.S. Paul is an example. The late T.S. Paul sadly passed away a few years ago, but he wrote books just off the cuff, never looked at them again, sent them out, and suddenly they were selling like hotcakes because they were just perfect science fiction stories. Finding that's more important than writing a good book. I keep putting that in air quotes. Finding a good book is knowing that genre. So I think I would say to avoid being in that position, that's what you should do. If you have tried to sell a book, it's simply not selling, have a deep look at the book yourself. Look at the charts of the genre you think it's in, read those books, and be honest with yourself. Is your book in line with those? Is it an easy read from one to the other? And if there's a bit of a jar between them because you've got stuff in your book that you wouldn't normally find in a cozy mystery, which you might think is a selling point, it's not a selling point. It's a hurdle to sales.
Yeah, that's great advice. What have you seen? What are some of the biggest changes that you've noticed in indie publishing over the last 5 years? I know when KDP first launched, and I'm drawing a blank. The Kindle Unlimited thing.
KU.
When KU first launched, there were people pretty quickly that learned how to game the system, and the KU issued updates and changed the way that they pay out and all of that. And there have been several iterations over the years as they kind of work things out, and it's to a pretty stable place right now where people are making a good living. But there are constant changes because more people enter the industry, and lots and lots of factors. But what are some of the biggest things that you've noticed over the last few years that have had the biggest impact on indie publishing?
I think the biggest one is the explosion of subgenres.
Okay.
Which has been really amazing and wonderful because it's reader-led. You referred to this at the beginning. So particularly in romance, but not just in romance, you have all these tropes. The reverse harem, the mafia stuff. I saw my friend Cara's writing mafia vampire stuff at the moment, and she's not the only one. Because readers have said this is. What's more mafia than a vampire, right? So you put those two together.
Right.
Yeah, vampires are running an organised crime in a city, and but it's spicy romance, or it's clean and wholesome romance, Western clean and wholesome romance. Now, there's no way the traditional industry was serving those readers like that before. That is a direct result of that closeness that you referred to, Hank, at the beginning between author and reader, and I think that's an amazing, wonderful thing. And dear old Bill Bryson had a go at self-publishing a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you noticed that. He sort of said there's too many self-published authors and too many books, and I don't think he could see any positives from it. But that for me is a huge positive that's for the reader, not the writer or the industry. It's the reader-led service. So I think that's been a really, really amazing thing that's happened, and I've watched that unfold in front of me. Just look at cozy mystery, the cooking cozy mystery subgenre. The cozy mystery is set around baking and cakes and stuff, or the K9 thriller subgenre where there's always a service dog involved. And this is indie changing the face of reading.
Right. And then you'll see traditional publishing 2 or 3 years later. Start bringing out some of these, and you're like, wow, where have you guys been? Yeah.
Because we're in our publishing company. We are currently publishing somebody whose strapline is Jack Reacher with the dog, and I think that's a brilliant strapline. People who love the Jack Reacher kind of thing and service dog, there you go, done for you. So that's been positive. I think on the slightly less positive side, it's the change that's happened in my time since 2015. I probably entered the industry properly to today. Is it's become much harder. I think the competition levels are much higher. Being seen, Facebook ads don't work as well as they used to work. I think because of the privacy changes primarily, but there are still avenues that are opening to us. I mean, the direct selling is growing at the moment and becoming more of a thing for indie authors, so we should focus on that. Amazon ads, I think will probably take over from Facebook ads as being the number one choice of authors in the next year or so. So there's ways out of it, but that it is true to say it's harder to sell books than it was 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I remember when KDP first launched, people were writing short books, making a cover in Microsoft Word, throwing it up, selling 1 million copies. It's like, how is this happening? And but the competition has not only broadened. There are way more people publishing, but there are also very competitive titles where so many times you can't on the surface you can't tell whether this book is traditionally published, if it's indie published. I mean, the everyone has just upped their game, to the point that yeah, competition is a serious thing. How do you cut through all of that? Are there strategies that have worked that help people get visibility?
I think get the basics right. Talked about earlier, making sure your package is absolutely on point and that your path from whatever advert type you use, with Facebook, Amazon, whatever, the path is smooth with no hurdles. So there's no point at which a potential reader starts off thinking this is going to be a contemporary romance and then gets a bit confused when they see the blurb or whatever. It's all got to dovetail and work well. So get the fundamentals right. If you're going to run Facebook ads, the focus now is on the creative, on the image and the copy, because Facebook is the one now doing the targeting for you. There's very little targeting options left, and what is left, I think, is out of date. So I would say to cut through the noise now, you need to be just absolutely on point. You can't be casual about this anymore.
Right.
The Amazon ads platform is a much more complicated platform than people think it is. It looks simple on the outside. It's the opposite of Facebook ads, which looks complex on the outside, is actually quite simple. You don't have many levers to pull. Amazon ads has a depth to it that you need to master. But that's where, at the moment, that's where I'm putting my focus on Amazon ads. So I think that's going to be the main avenue for us. It's always had that advantage, hasn't it, Amazon ads, of people already being in the mood for buying, because that's where they see your ad. And I think that's going to work for us. So there are ways of cutting through. Kickstarter is another one at the moment. You find your tribe, but that does rely on you having built that mailing list. Another reason to start as soon as you can on building a mailing list. Don't be afraid to give something away, write a novella or whatever. It's not wasted in any sense. And yeah, just be super focused more than we used to be.
Over the last several years, audiobooks have been one of the biggest growth markets in publishing, and probably because we all carry a box around that I probably have 3 dozen audiobooks downloaded on my phone right now, and my library of things to be downloaded is massive. But it's just become so easy to listen to books now. And then if you're a podcaster about books, listening to books is makes my job so much easier. From the indie publishing position, where do you see audiobooks going in the future? And do you feel like the rise of AI is going to have any impact on audiobooks?
I think one interesting thing about audiobooks is I think that there's evidence that listeners are becoming I think the word is agnostic as to their platform. So they're more likely, if they see an advert for an audiobook, more likely to download it onto an app that allows you basically to direct sell. So you use BookFunnel, for instance, have a way you
Mhm.
can upload your audiobook and sell it, and people just download the BookFunnel app on their phone. Now for KU that doesn't work because people are a bit suspicious about, where does this book go, and I haven't got the infrastructure for that. So okay, you might have a
Yeah.
nuke in Kobo in Canada and those places where Kobo's bigger, but for most of the world it is Amazon. It's hard to get around, hard to say to people, I'll send you, the BookFunnel link or PDF that they pay for. With audiobooks, I think there's more chance of us being able to direct sell in the future, or more chance of a much more equitable kind of distribution of audiobooks happening. And I think the audiobook industry knows that as well, because they are buying up audiobooks at quite a rate at the moment. A lot of my author friends are getting emails from the big players saying, "Would you like to sell the rights to your books?" So I think that's a really exciting thing for us, that we can, because direct selling is always going to make more than, and you can
Well,
sell an
sure.
audiobook for £8 or £9 easily, because people are used to paying knocking on 20,
Right.
same dollars. So that's a really exciting thing for us. AI. So AI, it's a huge subject, AI, isn't it? But
Yeah.
on the audiobook side, I mean, I have a novella. So I got both my two audiobooks have both been done by humans. My third audiobook would potentially be my novella, and I have, just because I'm interested in it and want to see what it sounds like, I've been playing with 11 Labs to get that read. I haven't had a tremendous experience with it so far with 11 Labs. Although I don't know, my jury's out. I'm sort of halfway through that project, Hank, so I can't really
Yeah.
give you a definitive answer. My answer,
Understood.
when you think about will AI make a difference here, the answer is almost certainly yes, because
Yeah.
it's a bit like electricity coming up in the late 19th century. It's that seismic.
Yeah.
But for AI, in the way that we hope that AI will never be able to write a book, and by the way, I don't think it ever will. Well, I guess a lot of people listening to this will hope it will never be able to properly narrate their books because they're narrators and so on. But
Yeah.
there is a possibility we end up with a two-tier system where you spend your $2,000 to $3,000 getting your book done, edited by a human,
Hmm.
but that's going to have to cost. That's going to go into ACX or whatever, and it's going to have to cost $20 or a token a month. But then below that, for $4.99, you have the AI version, and that, people with disabilities who always listen to audiobooks, that sort of opens up a range of listening to them, and they have
Hmm.
the option for the more professional one. I don't know. Have you tried the AI voice on your books yet?
No. And I've heard some, and it's getting to be decent. Um, the real problem, some of the voices are very good, but the inflections and
Yeah,
the little nuances, I think, is where the real, it, you can tell, they're becoming much better, but they still lack some of the human element, and that's just where a good voice actor is just always going to be better. I don't know. It may get, I think, like you said, I could see a place where a two-tier system um, really works out, because I know some people that will you know uh, open up a book on their Kindle and use or the Kindle app on their phone, and use I forget what the feature's
oh,
called, but
text to speech.
the
Yeah,
text to speech,
yeah,
and listen to it, and that's perfectly fine for them. But they
yeah.
don't expect it to be a voice actor. They're just wanting to process the information. So some people are okay with that, but they understand that it's not a replacement; it's a stopgap. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. I think my personal opinion about AI for writers is the best place where AI shines is as a writing assistant, not as a thing to do the writing. You
Yeah,
know, because
100%.
yeah, and
Yeah,
and I've had this conversation with people that the metaphor I like to use is, um, when you have a conversation with a buddy and you're talking about your book idea, there's something that happens in the talking back and forth where the
yeah,
story grows, and you're kind of kicking ideas back and forth. Oh, I like this, but what about this? And then, well, what if you did this? And oh, I can see the hole in this plot here. Maybe you should do this. And I could see an AI assistant that really shined in that aspect. But anytime you say, okay, well, write this for me, you know,
Yeah, so it's like
yeah,
a
it's always
15 year
going to
old's
be
first
subpar.
attempts at, yeah, it's a very, or they always, AI always writes really obviously in a slightly cliched way.
Right.
But I completely agree with you. Having it as an assistant is actually brilliant. And I'm plotting my novel at the moment. I'm changing slightly to spy espionage, so it's a bit of a genre shift for me. And having AI as that assistant where you're going backwards and forwards on ideas is helping crystallize it. But also, it's like an assistant who writes everything down for you. So you can say, okay, so we've worked out the first act of this book. Break that down into scenes for me, and don't forget to, in each scene to remind me where the character arc is. Now, I could do that. It'd take me an afternoon of laborious writing in Word. It's done
Yeah.
in seconds by AI. So that
Right.
speeds up my process. It's still my story, still my, for the people listening going, oh my
Right.
God, he's using AI. It's
Yeah.
still, you're still the creative behind it, but it's a
And it's still your
fantastic
author
service.
voice as it's being
Yeah.
written. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the writing, but I wouldn't want AI to do the writing for me.
Yeah.
But there are bad actors. We know people have been stuffing books, and they've been loading up these what they're called low content books for years. If there's a way of making money on Amazon, they'll do that. So there's people now absolutely 100% turning out Regency romance books that are written by AI, but they are not selling. I've got a friend who looks very carefully at this, and he says you can see them. There's lots of them, but they're not selling, and that's a really good thing
Right.
for us. And why
Yeah.
would they, by the way? Because people, some of us write really good books and struggle to get them to sell.
Yeah.
So writing very below average books, they're not going to suddenly work. So, and I don't just hope, but I'm fairly certain that even with another 10 years of meteoric changes in AI, it's never going to have that human element, that lived life
Yeah.
experience, the faults that we all have that we bring into our writing.
Right.
So I think we're safe for a while.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think we should be looking for ways for AI to make us better writers, not to just continue to game the system, because
Yeah,
those things never pan out. I mean, from when KU first launched, we had people that were publishing one-page books because KU was paying a flat fee for a finished book before they
yeah,
started doing page reads. So you had the market was flooded with one-page books, and they were making $2 or whatever, off of it and cashing in. Well, the people that were doing that are nowhere to be found now, because they were just there to make that quick buck, and then they're off to whatever the next thing is now, and
yeah.
they weren't there to write books that mattered anyway. That was not their thing. So yeah, there's always going to be people that come in and try to flood the market with whatever the new gimmick is, but they'll all be gone. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a bit of turmoil now, but it's not long-term turmoil. I don't think. All these things tend to shake out eventually. But anyway, James, what services do you offer for people that are trying to get started in indie publishing and kind of feel overwhelmed and don't know how to start? What do you do to help authors?
So, well, like you, I do a podcast, and we try to gear it towards the beginning end. The beginning end sounds like a sort of thing you shouldn't write in a book. The start of people's careers. So
Yeah.
we have that. I guess I have a foot in a few camps. So the publishing company I started is now Vinci Books, and that does a 50-50 split. So we try to be as equitable as possible, and that's for people who just don't really want to take on the marketing.
Yeah.
As you say, any marketing you do is always very useful anyway, and you kind of expect
Right.
it to do that. So Vinci Books is looking for submissions. In terms of empowering self-publishing authors, we have a series of online courses, a series of sort of free materials, all at learnselfpublishing.com. And that's been my main focus for the last few years. So we have, with Susie Quinn, who I mentioned earlier, How to Write a Bestseller is her course, which we have on our books. There's a course called Self-Publishing Launchpad, which is quite a big course. That is everything about mailing lists, everything about websites, everything about uploading to KU and draft to digital. It's that kind of the first year of your life as an indie author set out for
Nice.
you. So that's our big one. And then we have a more advanced course, which is really for paid ads, paid advertising, which is the one we spend most time on because it keeps changing, all the time. That's a hard one to keep up to date, but it is there. So, I have been in that kind of education space for the last 10 years or so, and I like doing that. I like speaking to people, running conferences and doing retreats, try to give away as much advice as possible, but ultimately, if you want a really crafted product like our books, you do have to charge for that. So some of those
Sure.
courses are, they're premium products and they're sold,
Yeah.
but there is a lot of stuff for free, yeah.
Perfect. If someone is interested in getting started and wants to go through all the products that you have, and is there a good central location that is a kind of a jumping off point for them to go to?
Yeah, I mean, learnselfpublishing.com is the
Okay.
place to go, and there's a list basically of those courses that I talked about there, and you can read in more detail what's in the course, whether it's for you or not, and make a decision from that. So that's the jumping off point for people. They can always
Excellent.
email me as well. I can tell them.
Excellent. Well, we'll link that up in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you and get started. James, thank you for being so generous with your time. We really appreciate it, and we're going to send everyone to see you.
Hey Hank, thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed the chat, and yeah, it's been really fun.